Okay, so it is the 23rd of July, and on this day, Raymond Abraham was born. Unfortunately, he died in a car accident in Los Angeles, I think, in 2010. So Raymond Johann Abraham was born in 1933 in Linz, in East Tyrol, Austria. Throughout a 40-year career, Abraham created visionary projects and built works of architecture in Europe and in the United States. From 1952 to 1958, Abraham studied at the Graz University of Technology. In 1959, he established a studio in Vienna where he explored the depths and boundaries of architecture through building, drawing, and montage. Abraham's first book, the 1965 publication Elementare Architectur, was made at a time of transition between architecture studies and practice. In this early volume on elemental structures, Abraham explores the built environment, absent aesthetic speculation, and determinations about design, instead coming from the relative level of knowledge and also the desires of the builder. This is a strange language, English. I imagine the translation was not good. In 1964, Abraham emigrated to the United States. Abraham was an influential architect in his native Austria and the New York avant-garde. Abraham's poetic architectural vision was influenced by the Viennese tradition to align architecture with sculpture, and also by the Austrian physicist and philosopher Ernst Mach. Abraham theorized architecture on a collision course with the needs of humans, yet striving for coexistence in a constant state of creative tension. Beginning in the late 1950s, his enigmatic architecture placed Abraham among the avant-garde, such as Hans Hollein, Walter Pichler, and Günther Dominique. In 1958, Abraham collaborated with Friedrichs and Florian, placing third in an international competition to design the Pan-Arabian University of Saudi Arabia, and in 1959, placing second for the design of the Democratic Republic of the Congo Cultural Center in Leopoldville. Abraham criticized mainstream architecture's preoccupation with style, its indifference to history, and the rigid definition of modernism at that time. Abraham went on to influence generations of professional architects through architectural drawings, projects, and teaching. And this is something he said about teaching. Abraham explained his role as an educator as follows: teaching forces me to engage in a critical dialogue with somebody else and find a level of objectivity that allows me to have a fair critical argument. My role as a teacher is simply to clarify, although that's a bit simplistic. When I give a problem to the students, it's my problem. I'm trying to anticipate how I could solve that problem. And my joy is when the students come up with a solution I haven't thought of. I think this is important, and I wonder how many professors in our country think in the same way. In other words, how many professors enjoy when students find a different solution than the one they thought of. Okay, so this was the man, a little eccentric with a cigar, of course, as other architects enjoy. It's something about architects, they enjoy cigars. And he often had a hat on his head. As you can see here, different hat, but the same man. So I guess he was a man of many hats. He was teaching for a long time at Cooper Union, an excellent architecture school in New York City. This is a book which I actually have in the absence of Raymond Abraham, which, well, it was a conference in 2010 after he died. Okay, so some drawings. He drew a lot, and his drawings are very beautiful. His drawings show great skill, and they are not done digitally. He worked manually, and they are very, very specific. They are very, very Raymond Abraham. And I'll try to say a few words about his drawings. His drawings are very poetical and metaphysical. They, they are not concerned with pragmatics. You will never see in his drawings where a toilet is or where the parking lot is. His drawings are about the beauty of architecture, about the spirit of architecture, about the essence of architecture, and he seemed to have been interested in some kind of archetypal architecture. This kind of drawing would be totally discouraged in our country because our country doesn't accept metaphysical architecture or an architecture which appears to be, unrealistic. But the truth is, the essence of architecture belongs both to here and now and to beyond. What we mean by beyond, we can talk. Anyway, his drawings are very, very nice, and he drew a lot, as I said. In my opinion, Raymond Abraham pendulated somehow between life and death, and I actually think, I'm inclined to think that he had a certain preoccupation with thanatos, with death, and there is something in his architecture that makes me think so. He was exploring. He was searching for architectures that were not built. Maybe they will never be built, but he tried to open new horizons, new territories. He did it through drawing, but he also built several buildings, and we are going to see them. These drawings by Raymond Abraham, they are, as I said, very specifically belonging to him, to Raymond Abraham. It's the drawing used as an investigative tool. Again, you are not going to see here, quotation marks, and you are not going to see dimensions. You are not going to see pragmatics. You are not going to see even doors and windows, but you are going to see some kind of a visionary architecture, if we are to call it so, exploring maybe the very roots of architecture, which are not as pragmatic as we might think. I mean, of course, it's a difficult subject in a way, but what is the essence of architecture? And beyond this, what is architecture? I think we need people like Raymond Abraham, because otherwise we can be engulfed in an excessive prose and get extremely bored. It's inevitable, actually. When we remove the poetical side of architecture from architecture, there is a risk of losing the very soul of architecture. He knew how to build, and we are going to see some buildings built by him. But he was exploring through drawing new kinds of architecture. Obviously, he was in love with architecture. What else can I say? It's also a meditation on the human condition, on man, on life, on culture, on existence, on the earth and the sky, on the gods even, on life and death. Anyway. These kind of drawings were encouraged and done copiously at Cooper Union. this is what the professor did and this is what the students did, not necessarily in this, so-called style, but they were all exploring the poetic essence of architecture. As you can see, he was not only interested in the so-called architectural object, he was also interested in landscape architecture. He was interested also in urbanism in a way, and so moving beyond the object. Now we will look at a building he built, the Austrian Cultural Center in New York, and I'm sad that I became friends with an architect, with an engineer who worked with him on this project, but I don't think he's here, Mahadev Raman. He worked on this project. It's a very slender, narrow skyscraper built between two other buildings, and this was built. But somehow, the same kind of drawing that we already saw, he was exploring the architecture of that building through similar means. Here is the building, is this one. And as you can see, it was built, squeezed between two other large, bulky buildings. But still, his building stands out as a distinct architecture. A small country in a way, Austria, and this building is narrow, but it stands out. And Austria has excellent art and architecture, as you know. It has incredible architects. It had and has and will have. And I wonder why. Why are they so good at architecture? Well, I don't know. They're open-minded. They explore. They take risks. Something not everybody does. So again, his building is just from here to here, quite narrow, but tall. Interesting work. In Manhattan. Very nice drawings of the sections. These are not really working drawings. They are working in the sense that he explored the building through these drawings, but they also have an artistic quality. Here we have the plans. Sorry for the, it's not very clear what's going on here, but anyway, you can imagine looking at how the building was built and the sections. These kind of speculative drawings, if I can call them so, are even more seductive because they explore the spirit of the work. And even if the building is not literally reproducing what is in the drawings, or vice versa, the drawing is not literally reproducing what is in the built work, but in both cases, we are dealing with architecture's process, and it's about the quest towards arriving at a building. This is the back of the building. I mean, it's not so tall compared to the other gigantic buildings around, but considering it's very narrow, here is the man with his hat. And the truth is the work, the built work is very similar in spirit with the drawings we saw. Now we are going to see at an apartment building in Berlin. Berlin had the brilliant idea 3 times in the 20th century to invite famous architects, important architects, to build housing complexes, even private houses, first in the 30s, then in the 50s, and then in the 80s. This was built in the 80s, and some other important architects were invited, like Aldo Rossi and Kleikus and even John Haydock and others, important architects who built in the 80s in Berlin. But this is the building built by Hans Hollein, also built, and Rob Krier and others. This is the building by Raymond Abraham in Berlin. Not the typical, I mean, in terms of appearance, not the typical apartment building. He considered himself to be a formalist. And in a way, it's true. Looking at the front elevation, you wouldn't expect that round courtyard behind. Well, it does have it. Elementary architecture, that's the cover of the book that I already read about, that he wrote. And this is a view of the courtyard of the same building in Berlin. Now, this is a house he built, I don't know where it is, I think in Austria. It's symmetrical, as you can see. And it's, a modernistic, if I can call it so, modernistic building, white, luxurious villa. What else can we say about it? It's another exercise in doing a private dwelling for someone who afforded, a big building and a big architect, so to speak. Now we arrive at an interesting building, the House of Music that he built in Austria. It is an interesting building, and its circularity in a way expresses the wholeness towards which music aspires. It also has, it is round, but it is also, you can see it has the presence of very astute angles. I mean, you know, it's a tension between the roundness of the building and the angularity of what is happening here inside. And I think that it is, in a way, it is a resolved conflict, but the conflict still exists. It's a good building, I would say, and it is some kind of a, you know, temple dedicated to music. It has rooms for, you know, exercising on instruments, housing even, I guess, residents, and also, you know, having concerts and so on. It's an interesting building and with an interesting function, the House of Music. I like very much its name. This is the plan. It's an ideal house in a way, and quite appropriately when we consider that it's about music. But the sculptural side of architecture is openly assumed. And indeed, what would architecture do if it banishes its, you know, presumed sculpturalness? It's important. It's important that a building has sculptural qualities, even if it's not per se a sculpture. I don't quite agree with Brâncuș, who said that a building is an inhabited sculpture. It's not quite like this, but sculptural qualities in a building do matter. And just like in the case of Louis Kahn, you know, this dialogue between concrete and wood, I think, is a beneficial one. The House of Music in Austria by Raimund Abraham. I keep saying architecture is beautiful if it is an adventure. And I think this is about an adventure, you know. I don't know who paid for this building, but, you know, it was, and it still is an adventure in its, you know, functioning for the purpose it was built. I would say it's still an adventure. And I think it's a good building. I mean, the reality of the unbuilt. Maybe we should talk about this topic, because we think only what is built has reality, but it's not true. Would we say that the drawings of Antonio Santelli are unreal, that they are not real? I think they are very real. Would we say that the project Broadacre City by Frank Lloyd Wright is not real because it was not built? I wouldn't say so. I would say that even La Ville Radieuse by Le Corbusier is real. Well, it was not built, and maybe it's good it was not built, but it has a level of reality. Would we say that the visionary drawings of Claude Nicolas Ledoux or Etienne Boulet are not real, were not real? I think they are real. In fact, the truth is, sometimes a drawing is more real than a built building. Because a built building, which is insignificant, which has no value architecturally, to me is less real than a drawing which is inspirational, which has the power to inspire, to evoke, to open up new ways of understanding architecture and so on. So again, I think a drawing could be, and maybe often is, I'm talking about a good drawing. A good drawing is of an unbuilt work could be more real than the built work of many people who have nothing to say in architecture. So I do believe that the unbuilt could be real. Not always. Anyway, the Delancy Tower, this is a project he proposed for New York City, but it was not built. So an unrealized project by Abraham for a structure on that Delancey Street on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Someone wrote here, in what direction is architecture moving? Architecture moved towards itself to dissolve in itself, to become speechless for the sake of silence, yet filled with a desire to signify its solitude. Silent, unknown, sign. In the written image, immutable. In the drawn image, unspeakable. In the built image, uninhabitable. The mystery of these images becomes the myth of the journey of architecture and the odyssey of the imaginary inhabitants who attempt to decipher them. This is what Maurice Blanchot said in the Song of the Sirens. And this is, you know, you could say it's just a model. Yes, it is, but in certain ways, it is, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps more real than a built work which says nothing. It's an unbuilt monument. Now, two other unrealized projects, the Beijing Center for Wellbeing. It was not built, but a proposal was made by Raimund Abraham. Sorry, the resolution of the pictures is not great. I mean, the dimensions. And now we arrive at a project he proposed for to replace the existing Times Tower building in Manhattan at 42nd Street. It was done for a competition, and he actually won that competition. And I also took part in that competition. At that time, I lived in New York City as a young man, and you will see my work too. But first, let's look at the project by Raimund Abraham. It's a little, this is actually, now he did two projects, one for Ground Zero, the World Trade Center, and one for Times Tower. Sorry, this is about the Ground Zero, a bird's eye view of what he proposed. A little difficult to read and to understand. Anyway, it does relate what we look at with his previous drawings that we saw. And it's all about, you know, monumentality, a monumental architecture. The Hinge Chair will arrive at the project in Times Tower in a few moments, but let's look also at a design of an object, the Hinge Chair, which is so typical of him because of the break. You know, it is a break, and here I would say is his flirtation, if I can use such a word, with death, with dissolution, with destruction, with deconstruction in a way. The rift represents the disruption that you know, death brings into everything, and you know, he anticipates in a way. It's a physical chair, but it's also metaphysical in a way. And you see even in the back, there is this narrow break, and it is more dramatic at the level of the seat. It's almost you know, claiming the status of instability. This chair is an unstable chair in a way. But in the danger that it implies, I think it's a commentary on the fragility of human life and our fragility as human beings. It's a questioning chair. Okay, and now his project for New York Times Tower. He won the competition. I personally don't think his project was, and not because he won and I didn't, but I think this idea to place theaters, identical little theaters, one on top of the other, is a little bit mechanical for my taste. You see, there are, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 identical little theaters placed one on top of the other. I find it, yes, a little mechanical, although in this area on 42nd Street, there are many little theaters, or there were many little theaters. I don't know how it is now. So this is kind of the verticalization of the spirit of the place, meaning 42nd Street. So this was the project by Raimund Abraham. And now you'll see my work. I was 30 years old when I did it. Is this drawing, and I will explain in a few seconds what I tried to do. I actually proposed 2 towers, one at 42nd Street and one at 48th Street. And why? Because if you look at the site plan, there are 2 important streets here, Broadway and 7th Avenue, which intersect at 45th Street. And the 45th Street intersection between 7th Avenue and Broadway, I imagine this is Broadway and this is 7th Avenue, is called the crossroads of the world. It's in a way the center of the world. It's equidistant from 42nd Street, which is here, and 48th Street. And so the distance from the center, the intersection between 7th Avenue and between Broadway and 7th Avenue is equal to 48th Street and 42nd, meaning 3 blocks. So for the Times Tower, I proposed a red tower symbolizing the sun because it is south here, red symbolizing fire, symbolizing the king, the mythical king, and symmetrically at 48th Street, a white tower symbolizing the queen, water, the moon. So here the red tower symbolizing the sun, fire, sulfur, and the king, and symmetrically in relation with the center, the crossroads, where the crossroads of the world are, 45th Street, a white tower symbolizing the queen, water, the moon, and Mercury. And in front of these 2 towers, I imagine 2 giant urban chairs, truly immense. This urban chair would have allowed one to pass underneath the seat on which the Red King sat, and symmetrically, it was to be a large urban chair, red, well sectioned, and again, the scale would have been at the scale of the place, meaning mid-Manhattan, large urban objects. On this one, having the white queen sitting, and on this one, the red king sitting. And here I was inspired by a book which I loved at that time, Psychology and Alchemy by Carl Jung. And he talked extensively about the symbolism of red and white. Red symbolizing, again, the sun, fire, sulfur, the king, and white symbolizing the moon, water, Mercury, and the queen. So the 2 principles, the masculine principle and the feminine principle, facing each other symmetrically and equidistant from the center, the intersection of the 2 streets, 7th Avenue and Broadway. And as you notice, the height of the building, if you would lower, so to speak, the building on the site plan, they would meet on the site plan exactly at 45th Street. I don't know if I explained very well now, spontaneously. Anyway, this is it. So let's wish him happy birthday and to express our regrets that he died in a tragic accident in Los Angeles in 2010. And now let's talk about Arata Isozaki, who is 90 years old today. What a beautiful age for the Pritzker Prize laureate Arata Isozaki. So he was born in 1931 on the 23rd of July, and today it is his birthday, the 90th. An interesting man. I actually attended a lecture by him at Columbia University in 1990 something, and I even wrote something which was called apropos of Arata Isozaki's lecture. At that time, he mentioned an interesting word, schizoeclecticism, and he said that his work was kind of like about schizoeclecticism. What could that mean? It could mean that he had many sources of inspiration, thus the word eclecticism, and the schizoid part, the schism, came from a certain tension and conflict. It was not a peaceful bringing together of various elements, but there was a tension, a conflict. And I guess that's why he talked about schizoeclecticism. He received the Pritzker Prize in 2019. He does look like an aristocrat of sorts. And of course, the age has its prestige. This one is also an interesting picture, showing him in a meditative posture, maybe, melancholy, and also very feminine, I would say. Anyway, Arata Isozaki, the Hiroshima blast site electric city drawing from 1968. This is very interesting. So in 1968, he was 37 years old, but somehow he anticipated deconstructivism, which happened, 25 years later. This is the drawing. Arata Isozaki was 14 years old when the terrible tragedies, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki took place. A boy at 14 is already someone who is aware of things that happened. And that tragedy probably marked him. And this is what he drew, what he imagined in 1968. This is a collage with the site of Hiroshima. This terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy of the nuclear bombing, the atomic bombing of 2 cities in Japan in 1945 in August. But this kind of architecture that he imagined in 1968 really was visionary. I mean, this kind of architecture was built in the early 90s, by people like Kopp Himmelblau and, others probably had similar visions, but this was done in 1968. Very interesting graphic representation of his meditation on the tragedy of that event, but also on the possible tragedy of a similar event that could happen. Now we arrive in 1960 at a built work, the OITA Medical Hall. So he was 29 years old when he built it. I like the heroic architecture of that time in Japan. It's, in my opinion, it's a more powerful architecture than what even Japan does now. It's true, we live at a different time. At that time, Japan was emerging from the deadly Second World War as a defeated nation confronted with immense tragedies. But look at this building, you know, this was built 15 years after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it expresses the immense will of the Japanese to move beyond the ashes of the Second World War. It is, you know, as it is called, a brutalist architecture. It is a fortress-like architecture. It is an architecture which expresses a heroic positioning in life that the Japanese had to have at that time, otherwise they would have disappeared. And there were other architects. We are going also to see an emblematic library he built around that time. I truly think, and he was not the only one, there were other architects in Japan at that time that were building kind of in a similar way, exposed concrete structures, very massive and sculptural. In a way, this massive sculpturalness expresses exactly this, the will of Japan to survive and to move forward, which they did. And they did brilliantly, you know, a defeated country that from ashes arrived at being one of the most potent countries in the world, economically, culturally, you name it. Now, the OITA Prefectural Library from 1966, this is the library that I referred to. I like this building, you know, it's heroic, it's open, it's a system that says I am not stuck in my limitations. I am willing to expand as knowledge expands. So it represents this longing for growing, for growth. When this picture was taken, I guess there was an exhibition with his works inside the library. Architecture is not just about the physical, and it's not just about function, it's also about metaphysics. And that's what an important Romanian theoretician and architect, Geme Cantacuzino, said when he said the architect works for man and his gods. Here, we could say, are the gods of knowledge, the metaphysical implications of what a library is. It's not just a static building, an object that contains books. It's also being part of the process of learning. What is a book? What is an accumulation of books? What does knowledge mean? And so on. So it has to be an open system. It's a rough building. It's not a building that tries to, you know, caress you to death, as I would like to say. It's a building that tells you in a way that the quest for knowledge is a difficult one, and it is a difficult one. You know, just laying on the sofa, you know, in a placid way, it doesn't bring you to closer to you know, knowing more about yourself or the world. So this is indeed a heroic library. I like this building by Isozaki more actually than some of his older, newer buildings or later buildings. But in those years, 60s, early 70s, Japan was admirable, I would say. The OITA library. Now, sports facility, Japan Fujimi Country Club, already, you know, it's an evolution which maybe was unavoidable, but the rough heroism of those years, the 60s, seems to be left behind. Japan became more sophisticated and more fluent in its you know, expressions of its self-confidence. I don't know. I still think personally I like more what happened previously, but this is my personal opinion. I mean, here is, you know, he's a little bit hedonistic. And yes, the building is well done, but I don't know. He built another building very similar to this one. You are going to see it. As you know, Japan built and continues to build almost anything. They can build anything. And there is this openness. Now, of course, not every architecture in Japan is like this. There is also a lot of commercial nonsense, but they have room also for exceptionalism, if I am to use this word. From 1973, 1974, Central Library, another library, but different from the OITA library from 1966, which we saw. Kind of similar to the sports facility center that we just saw. An art museum, the Kitakyushu Art Museum. This one with a certain emphasis on the power of these elongated cubes that extend themselves in a cantilevered fashion. You know, something of, you know, with the rhetorics of the Russian constructivists. This is a recent, you know, computer-generated image of the project. Now, it's a Cuba Center building. I like these renderings by Isozaki. I don't know if he did them himself or someone in his office, but you can tell that he was preoccupied with destruction, with a ruin. He made the project, but also he imagined the project, the house, the building he built. He was supposed to build and build, becoming a ruin. So this is about the dualities of existence in a way. You have construction and you have destruction. And it's an interesting way for an architect to imagine his own building as arriving at a certain stage of you know, annihilation or destruction. He inspired himself here, obviously, from the design of Michelangelo in Rome, Il Campidoglio. I'm talking about this plaza. I mean, the quotation is very obvious, except that in the center he has a little fountain, as opposed to what happens in Rome, where there is a statue of Mark Aurelius on top of a horse. Anyway, so the schizoeclecticism. You have the eclecticism because there are influences coming from Europe. He was also influenced by Palladio There were many influences, cultural influences and architectural influences in his work, in this case Michelangelo, but there is also the schism, because of the critical dialogue with the past. I mean, you see even the design inspired by Campidoglio. Campidoglio, it is distorted, it is affected by this intervention in the corner. So there is some kind of erosion that takes place there. And in that sense, perhaps the word schism or schizoeclecticism is appropriate. But all in all, I think we have built works of an architect who was aware and is aware of the dialectics of life. That you have life and you have death, and you have construction and you have destruction. And again, a drawing done in his office or by himself that seems to show that what the 14-year-old boy saw in 1945 was still following him. That, you know, this is kind of unique almost. You know, not many architects reflect on the future of their own buildings in this way. And now we are going to see a picture in a restaurant of two architects. Maybe you recognize them. I don't know if you know who this one is with that watch, and obviously is a fine restaurant. This is Arata Isozaki at the table in this, I don't know, maybe in Japan. And then across the table, Rem Koolhaas. So the two talking probably about architecture. Yes. On the left, Arata Isozaki, on the right, Rem Koolhaas. In a restaurant. Why not? Walt Disney in France. Now, why he took part in that project, but other architects, very important, took part in this. I don't know why France, you know, culturally such a, you know, sophisticated country, thought that building a Walt Disney not far away from Paris is the thing to do. This shows that even the most mature and sophisticated cultures cannot easily escape the pressures of high capitalism and the obsession with entertainment and even with frivolousness. In my opinion, it is said. I actually visited this, and yes, there are other buildings there by Frank Gehry and Michael Graves and Arata Isozaki and so on. I am actually turned off by this flirtation with, you know, superficial entertainment and with this mimicked joie de vivre. I consider entertainment as it is exported by Hollywood a cancer. You know, it is being caressed to death. You know, it's being caressed to death like you caress a cat to death. You know, we are killed by being caressed through the pleasure principle. Entertainment. What is entertainment? I think there is an important difference between entertainment and real pure joy. The Ode to Joy by Beethoven is not entertainment. But what can we do? In a way, the more prosaic and and restrictive life is, the more we need entertainment. But the entertainment is not leading anyone towards an intense way of living. It's actually an escape from living, an escape from life. It's a running away from the beauty of life in a way. The tea ceremony house from 1992, interesting work, and the change the Japanese had and have is that they have a very strong old culture. They still believe in myths. And you can tell, this is an architecture which is not mimicking tradition, is rooted in tradition, but is looking forward. It's both old and new. And I think it's a good work. I regret I don't have more pictures with this project. Maybe next year I'll amplify this presentation. So it is a ceremony building built by Arata Isozaki. Now a bus museum of art in Miami. From Japan, we go to Florida, 2001. A very different kind of building. Here there are some references, I don't know, to Mesoamerica, to the Maya culture. This is the Egyptian gallery, maybe even to Egypt in a way, if its function was to be just an Egyptian gallery, I don't know. But it does show the wide cultural interests of Arata Isozaki. Well, what we see there on the wall is not really Egyptian art. Now, the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing, in China, a good building, a little bit similar to the Kiasma Museum built by Stephen Hall in Helsinki. So Arata Isozaki in China, he built a lot, and he still builds. Actually, his very last works I do not have here included in this presentation. Convention Hall in Nara in Japan. Impeccably built, as the Japanese are quite good at. They build impeccably. The Modern Art Museum in Gunma. There are traces of the influence of postmodernism a little bit in his work. What can we do? He lived through that period of time, the 80s, early 90s, and that affected so many architects and their built works. 1986, an architectural drawing by Arata Isozaki. This kind of architectural drawing, I think, is very fruitful for architecture. It might not be fruitful for building the building, although here I see also dimensions, but it's a drawing that inspires through its, plastic, artistic qualities. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, rendering a typical Arata Isozaki rendering with strong shadows, but also colors. I like these renderings. They are concerned with the essentials of the building. Now, the sculpture is not by him. An art tower Mito, an excellent tower. You know, I don't know exactly how it functions as an art tower, but it's impressive in its slender articulation of geometrical figures. And the spiral is implied. I mean, just this building, if it was built by an architect, then it would have been a source of pride, right? But he built many other buildings. Now we have in Romania the endless column by Brâncuș. In a way, maybe we can comment on both. This is a building, it's not a sculpture. I imagine there are usable spaces in the tower. Actually, I should have known and I don't know. As you can see, his work is very, very varied. The House of Mankind, an ambitious naming, just as in the case of Raimund Abraham, we saw the House of Music. Now we see the House of Mankind in Galicia, in Spain. Hope I have pictures. Yes, here it is. A little similar to, maybe more than a little, to two other buildings that we previously saw. Sorry, the drawing is a little difficult to read, it's too small. Now the Domus Museum of Mankind, designed by, it's this one. We already saw the Palau Sant Jorge in Barcelona. It's a sports arena or a convention center. A little bit static, this one, and a little bit conventional somehow, but it's a technically very plausible and well-functioning building. And it does have something Japanese, more than you know, being connected with the local Catalan culture. So this is in Barcelona. He built all over the place. Yes, it's a large sports arena. Arata Isozaki. Now an international arts village from 1995 to 1998 in Japan. But unfortunately, I don't have other pictures with this. I apologize, I should have had. Now the Museum of Japanese Art and Technology in Krakow, in Poland. I mean, this is not so interesting as some other buildings by him, but anyway. A Congress Center in Krakow, also in Poland. A little bit too much glass here for my taste, but you know, my taste is irrelevant actually. Anyway, Arata Isozaki, he built two buildings in Krakow, in Poland. Now, this is an interesting work, the Shanghai Himalaya Center. It is a provocative work, and it shows the versatility of Arata Isozaki. He was and is a man of the time. You know, he's continuously trying to be up to date. And here we see the quest for the cave, the revival of the cave, or the cave revival, as someone here called it in a rather amusing way. It has two sides. Again, this is a schismatic building as well. Talking about the schizo-eclecticism that I mentioned, it has rational prism-like architecture, but also it has this mimicking kind of natural, you know, if I can call it architecture, you know, kind of cave-like. Just like the Japanese, the Chinese build anything. Why the return to the cave? Maybe in reaction to excessive rationalism, excessive, you know, so-called enlightenment, excessive belief in rectangularity, and so on. So Arata Isozaki in China. But you see, he was not happy to do just this. He also did this and this. So there is indeed right here in this building that schizo-eclecticism that I mentioned and that I've heard him talking about in his lecture many years ago. So in a way, it's about the dualities of life. We have nature, well, mimicked here in this way. We have the, you know, the cerebrality of man, and we have the tension between the two. I guess we need both in Arata Isozaki's conception. How convincing this is mimicking being a cave, I'm not sure about that. If it's, I mean, you can tell here that it's fabricated. Now, this is a curious work and shows again the extreme versatility of this architect. He collaborated with this Indian artist who is quite famous, Anish Kapoor, and they created this inflatable structure that houses concerts or whatever. This is inflated and inflatable architecture. This is how it is when it is not inflated, and this is what it becomes. A little bit, you know, too literal about certain things, but interesting, an interesting inflatable structure, and it does function. The collaboration between an architect and an artist. I keep advocating this cause to have architects collaborate with artists. The way we banish art from architecture, in my opinion, is tragic. I think we should invite the artist in the process of imagining buildings, drawing buildings, building buildings. Their participation might benefit not just us, but also them. because artists feel useless in today's world. What do? If they don't build, they don't participate to the, you know, the queen of the arts, which architecture used to be. They are condemned to being isolated and doing chisel work or whatever. Sad. Anyway, here we are dealing with a, you know, well-known architect and a well-known artist, and this is what they created together. Now, this is an interesting work, again, very different from what we just saw and what we saw earlier. It's a desert pavilion, actually a series of small structures he built for an art collector, I think. You know, like a little concrete altar in the desert. And here is another little structure. You know, this is in the United States. Maybe this is the client exercising in the desert, and this is, I don't know, someone who takes care of the children of the art collector, and sitting on the altar built by Arata Isozaki, and maybe that is the wife of the art collector. I don't know. Little concrete structures. Some furniture design by Arata Isozaki, whimsical chair with a tall back, kind of like in Macintosh. A little bit awkward at the back if you contemplate the back legs compared to the front legs. But this again expresses that schismatic side of Arata Isozaki. Art and architecture. These are other renderings by him. Interesting because they show simultaneously the will to build and also the awareness that what is built one day will collapse. Also, we have a dialogue between light and shadow, kind of in a similar spirit. The dialectics between you know, light and shadow, between construction and destruction. This one we already saw with the museum in Los Angeles. Some urban visions from 1960, 1962. Yes, visions. Yes, urban. Yes, courageous in the sense of, I mean, utopian. But we need such you know, imaginings from architects. It was not built, but who knows? Maybe one day they might. Who knows? That's it. I'm not going to talk about Hiroshi Hara. He's a different architect. But let's wish happy birthday to Arata Isozaki. And